on pace to investigate about twice the number of anti-gay incidents in 2013, from slurs to felony assaults, compared to 2012.
The gunman caught up with Mr. Carson outside of a building at 60 West 8th Street and began shouting at him. "Do you want to die here?" he asked Mr. Carson. According to Mr. Kelly, before pulling out the revolver and shooting Mr. Carson once in the cheek.
It is clear that the victim here was killed only because and just because he was thought to be gay. There's no question about that.
David Jimenez was walking his dog on South 3rd Street between Bedford Avenue and Berry Street when he was verbally accosted by a group of men shouting anti-gay slurs. He was then physically attacked by one of the men and suffered a broken eye socket and a broken nose.
A gay Canadian man has reportedly been left paralyzed after a brutal October 12th attack. 27-year-old Scott Jones remained in critical condition at a hospital in Halifax, Nova Scotia, after being stabbed twice in the back and having his throat slashed.
Stephen Torres, 22, stabbed Ever Orozco, age 69, because he believed that Orozco was making sexual advances towards him. Orozco died from his injuries sustained in the attack. Torres was apprehended 6 blocks away, arrested, and charged with murder as a hate crime.
So, coming to New York for any young gay person is an experience like no other. It's like, yes, finally people get me and they love me for who I am. Or so I thought. So this was my first job in New York. Well, weren't they just the nicest?
Wow, you do that really well.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm an actor. Although, I guess you could kind of call that method acting.
Oh, so you're,
Yeah. Is that a problem?
No, it's just I'm from Texas and, you know, we hang people like you down there.
The next week I wasn't on the schedule. And then all these other things started happening. The murder of Mark Carson right here in the West Village, Dan Quintaro getting bashed in Alphabet City, Ever Orozco murdered in Queens. And like these, there's been dozens of attacks all over the city, the country, and around the world. It feels like there's a war going on, and these are its casualties. So I started to wonder why. How can there be so much hatred? Why is it that we can legally marry, but we can't walk safely down the street? So I started talking to some of the people around the city to try and find out. This is Reverend Mark. He is the pastor right here at St. John's Lutheran Church.
I've been a pastor for 2 years as of August, and not only pastor for 4.5 years. I was raised in a household where faith was real, and it wasn't forced on us, but it was just very much a part of our lives. So it's always been a part of my life, and even growing up gay, I never felt from the Lutheran Church that I was being pushed out the door or told I couldn't be who I am. So I've been involved with the church with a congregation everywhere I moved. And I actually felt a call to ministry early on, but at the time the church was still struggling with issue around gay clergy. So I kind of thought, well, if they don't know what to do with me, I'll do other things. And then as they were changing, and I went through some life changes myself, finally around 2004. As I say, I lost the wrestling match, and I kind of gave up, and I said, yeah, okay. And I went to seminary, and immediately, right away, it was like, yeah, this is where I need to be.
This is Tree. He's a bartender just down at the Stonewall Inn, and he was there the night of the Stonewall riots.
I'm bartending on this block 47 years. Ninth Circle, Julius isn't here. I was a war counselor in a gang in Brooklyn, the Halsey Bops, and I had to fight other gangs, and I would knock a guy on his ass, and I would, like, get him in a headlock and something, and then accidentally always rub across the crotch to see how big his dick was. And thank God, knock wood, no one had figured that out. And some of them I go, oh, that's a nice size.
This is my friend Brian. He moved here to New York, and then he met Garth. We met on the streets. I was walking out of the subway at Columbus Circle, and he was walking towards it, and I was on holiday, and I was going to light a cigarette, and then he smiled, and I smiled, and we kept walking, and I sort of turned around, he was still looking at me, and then he asked for a cigarette, and we shared a cigarette, and then we went and had a beer, and we went from there. We both quit smoking since. Yeah, that was it. That was like 3.5 years ago. So a lot of the violence has been concentrated here in the West Village. A lot of the attacks happen in and around these streets. And this is sort of New York's gay heart. It's where the Stonewall Rebellion started, and it's really where the gay liberation movement began.
The night of the Stonewall Rebellion, after we broke the windows, the walls, used parking meters, pulled them out of the ground and used them as battering rams and knocked the doors down. And when we had nothing else to throw, we lit garbage cans on fire, threw them through the windows, set the bar on fire. That's when the police had to come and help the Vice Squad, because they were denying, they were busy, and the Vice Squad came and started beating us up. Cops came in, the Vice Squad, they pushed a couple people, shoved a couple people, they pushed this young man that they didn't know was a lesbian because she had a big mustache. And they took 2 cops to pull her off the cop. She was beating the shit out of him. She's 93 now, living in an assisted living home in Brooklyn. Her name is Stormy DeLaver.
The cops were parading patrons out the front door of the Stonewall at about 2 o'clock in the morning. I saw this one boy being taken out by 3 cops, only one in uniform. 3 to 1. I told my pals, I know him. That's Williamson, my son Sonia Jane's friend. Williamson briefly broke loose, but they grabbed the back of his jacket and pulled him right down on the cement street. One of them did a drop kick on him. Another cop senselessly hit him from the back. Right after that, a cop said to me, "Move, faggot," thinking that I was a gay guy. And I said, "I will not. And don't you dare touch me." With that, the cop shoved me, and I instinctively punched him right in the face. He bled. He was then dropped to the ground, not me.
Charlie, myself, a bunch of us broke out from the side door, and we were outside about 20, 30 people, then also 100 people, then 300 people, then 600 people, and the cops were definitely afraid to leave the building. Because word got around and we saw paddy wagons and police cars and people gathering. You had to straight in gay people, old and young. After the rebellion, a week later, when everybody started flaring up again, Mayor Lindsay went on the air and told the police to leave the village, and that's when the entrapment laws stopped. And it took a couple more years until normal people started opening up bars.
So how come we've come so far since then, but violence still seems to be a big part of our movement?
This is Robert, who owns Boots and Saddles.
I took over the bar 7 years ago. I love the history here. I worked here for 9 years before I bought into it. You know, this is where the gay movement began, Christopher Street, where I just love the history, and I love the neighborhood. It's a good neighborhood, a lot of good businesses, a lot of good people. This is trade.
I've seen a million changes over the years. The duplex that used to be the Village Voice, and then tore that building down and built it.
Call out faggot and everything else. And they'd throw bricks and bottles out of car windows at people. That was in the 80s, right here in New York. You have to realize that there weren't a lot of gay bars. Now we're spread out all over the place. So you come down to Christopher Street and you know where we're going to be. It's like shooting fish in a barrel.
This year, I timed the parade from beginning to end. It was 5 hours and 17 minutes long. I was in the grandstands on 26th Street, and every politician came over, shake my hand, hug me, kiss me. I told Wiener if he sent that picture to a guy, we'd get a lot more votes.
About 7 years ago, it started to change, and each year it's gotten a little worse. People being mugged, being robbed. You know, there's a lot of street kids everywhere. They're a little crazy. You know, and I think it happened when they closed 42nd Street. You know, they closed that, they cleaned it up, they made it a lot more Disney-like, the whole Times Square area. So every night somebody's being attacked on the street.
There's always an edge of violence here, you know. As open as the city is, you still have homophobia. I mean, just yesterday we had an attack. A couple got beat up in Chelsea, right outside the Clearview Cinema, so it exists.
The guy who got killed, he was one of our customers. I didn't know him personally, but I found out later that he came in at night when I'm not usually here. So he was one of our regulars. We went to the march. We marched that day, you know, that Memorial Day for him. We went on the march, a lot of my bar people, you know, but 2 days before that, you had another homophobic attack at Madison Square Garden.
This summer alone, someone was killed over at Great Papayas on 6th Avenue. There were some beatings, there was a rash of attacks, and I can't absolutely pin it to DOMA and other things, but I feel like it's hard to say it's a coincidence when we move forward with civil rights, and all of a sudden we're getting attacked again. Every group, when they move forward, you get this reactionary vibe that people will then turn and get angry because the hatred is so deep, they just can't believe that we're moving forward.
Reverend Mark.
All I can think of, and it doesn't make any sense to me, you know, people keep saying, especially here in the village itself, the people come to be safe, and here they're being, you know, attacked. And all I can think of is that in any movement, look through history, in any movement, the bigger the steps forward, the more radical the attacks are, or the more intense the attacks are. And so, whether people are doing it consciously, the way they used to, hey, let's go down and beat up some gays, or just a more subconscious kind of thing that what's going on here? Things are unraveling. I feel, you know, anxious, and there's someone who makes me feel anxious, so boom. I don't know. It's, I guess I put it on that these are some of the biggest steps that this movement has taken since the Stonewall riots. And so there are going to be backlash, and that's why every movement has its martyrs. And it's sad, but it's human, and it's why we talk about evil in the world. I don't need to talk about devils, or I think there's enough evil in people. You know, I'm not one who dwells on that. When I talk about evil, I talk about evil that we all have within us.
So, although marriage equality has been one of the most amazing triumphs for the LGBT community, clearly it's also been a source of tremendous backlash. And I'm trying to figure out why this issue is so important to both sides of the debate. This is the Reverend Brian Fisher.
Companionship is just not one of the purposes that homosexuals can fulfill in marriage. They don't know anything about the standing, lasting relationship. They can't do it. There's just so much pathology associated with homosexual behavior that they're not able to pull it off.
This is Brian again.
Monogamy has been a big part of our relationship as well. So I don't think that's going to change when we get married. The rules of the relationship stay the same. We continue to be monogamous. We continue to be careful with each other and be kind to each other.
A pair of major victories for the gay rights movement. The Supreme Court on Wednesday ruled that married same-sex couples were entitled to federal benefits, and by declining to decide a case from California, effectively allowed same-sex marriages there.
Doma was beautiful here. I mean, the streets were crazy. Don't ask, don't tell. When the president repealed that, you know, it was slam packed. You know, the energy was just great. You just felt the energy here. You know, our church across the street, he's been very busy marrying people from out of state and from New York.
I think I'm outdoing all my colleagues on the island of Manhattan because of where we're at. In fact, I was here a month. It was Labor Day weekend, and we had a concert going on. So the doors were open. I wasn't at it, but the guy who was the sexton at the time called me up and said, "Someone wants to talk to you." And I come down, and there are two lesbian couples who are in town for a soccer tournament. And I know that sounds like so cliche, but anyway, and they had been married in California, only to have it repealed. And so while they were here, they wanted to be married again. And because keep in mind, it was so amazing. Marriage equality passed in June, and I started here in August. So that I knew when marriage equality passed and then the gay pride parade that followed that weekend, I knew that I was going to be coming here already, but I was still in another church in Queens. And so we came down to the stone wall. I can't even talk about it without getting emotional. And we're outside of the stone wall that night when it passed, the Senate, the state Senate. And I just looked across the street and I'm like, I'm going to be serving there. And then my husband and I marched in the Pride Parade that Sunday. And to march down and walk right past this church and say, a month away, and I'm going to be here, it was just too much. It was just too much.
This is Reverend Fisher again.
That the Supreme Court will have enough constitutional sense, enough moral decency, and enough foresight not to make a catastrophic blunder here. So my hope is that the Supreme Court will give full faith and credit to the 30 states whose constitutions forbid same-sex marriage. If it doesn't, it will be too late for America. If they don't do this, they will be opening the door to not only same-sex marriage, they will be opening the door to transsexual marriage, opening the door to polygamy, opening the door to incest, opening the door to pedophilia.
I don't wish this on us, but I'm wondering if we're about to have a second, not civil war, but I mean, will this be the issue that breaks us as a nation? Because I mean, if the national government starts saying to states, sorry, but you have to marry these people, I don't know what's going to happen, because there are some people who feel pretty strongly about this down, and I hate to characterize, but it's in the South, you know? And I mean, look at just right before DOMA is struck down, North Carolina, which is not a radically right-wing state. I mean, yes, they lean that way, but they were able to pass a constitutional amendment, you know, limiting marriage. And so, what's going to happen? I don't know what's going to happen, you know, and we don't have the big enemies that we had in the Cold War that were keeping us together out of fear. You know, the terrorism, our war on terrorism is such a localized thing that it doesn't necessarily need to keep us together as a nation. So who knows? Who knows what's going to happen?
So, perhaps violence is just a product of our momentum, a backlash against our new rights. But I can't help feeling that maybe homophobia is more endemic and persistent than that. So where does it come from?
An elaborate and comprehensive study out of the University of Georgia confirms what many experts have suspected for quite some time. Homophobic men are gayer than Carson Kressley at a Barney season sale.
Sometimes a gay basher is a gay person that hates his homosexuality. Anybody that hates it that much either has sex with guys or wants to have sex with guys.
Authors investigated the role of homosexual arousal in exclusively heterosexual men who admitted negative effect toward homosexual individuals. Participants consisted of a group of homophobic men and a group of non-homophobic men, male homosexual and lesbian videotapes, and changes in penile circumference were monitored. Both groups exhibited increases in penile circumference to the heterosexual and female homosexual videos. Only the homophobic men showed an increase in penile erection to male homosexual stimuli. The groups did not differ in aggression.
So, maybe it's just about sex. After all, it is our supposedly divergent sexual attraction that people have a problem with. But maybe it's not so much what we do as how we do it. This is Brian, if I can find him. Yeah, I'm a bit angry at the queer community sometimes. Pride Parade first year was amazing, you know, like really, really overwhelming for someone who came from from Outback Australia. I mean, it's quite a hostile place. To have a city shut down for gay pride is just, it was amazing. But then I also think about, like, you know, the sort of silly queens. People associate this idea of, like, gay rights with promiscuity and drug taking and public nudity or indecency, and it's like, we still have to abide by all the same rights and responsibilities. You know, you don't get the stage and, like, act up and flaunt, you know, and in order to become this stereotyped sort of, or this thing that can be easily ridiculed, you know, like the silly queen. So sometimes I feel like that with the gay community. This is a conversation I had with a friend of mine, David.
The thing about the Black Party is it has everything. It's big and sweaty, leather, sex, music, whatever you want. The music is amazing. Some people just go for the music. People say that circuit parties are all about drugs, but there are people like Justin who don't take drugs, who don't even touch a drink. Justin spends all of his time on the second floor.
What's on the second floor?
The second floor is just sex. I try to tell Justin that diversification is important, you know? He just wants sex 100% of the time. But I like to dance a little, drink a little, take drugs a little, you know, variety.
But then I kind of think maybe this is just the way it's always been. Maybe it's part of our culture and people just need to accept it.
We'd walk around and say, you're from New Jersey, I'm from Brooklyn, want to have sex? Nothing was locked. We'd actually tiptoe onto somebody's roof and have sex. Sometimes we'd sleep there till the sun came up. It was fun in those days. We'd have sex in movie houses, train stations. Of course, in the old days, it cost a nickel to go to the bathroom. And once you got in there, there were 10 people making believe they were smoking. So as soon as you took your dick out to pee and looked the guy next to you's dick, everyone knew you were gay, everyone started grabbing each other. We had no idea of bars. We thought men's bathrooms in the neighborhood movie house, or the men's room in the train station, was the only place to have sex, or people that you knew in that house.
Did you meet our friend Benno? Benno's great. He's really big time in media and branding. He got Martha Stewart on the air. Anyway, he used to be really into leather. So he has all this gear, like 20 grand worth of gear. He has some crazy shit. He said he was going to give me some of it because he doesn't really use it anymore, but he hasn't yet. Gear is so expensive.
Now it's too open. The younger generation have no idea of the history of gay life and the people that went to jail for them. They all think the neon lights were still here and the blinking and you know, years ago you met a guy at a bar, you asked him what sign he was. Now you ask him what gym you belong to.
This is from an actual personal ad I found online. This is the image of a real man. What I look for in a guy breaks down to simple 3 basic elements: body, mind, and spirit. Body. I believe my pics undeniably define what I expect. Mind. The thought process that's triggered within the first 10 seconds you see me. Spirit. Let's just call it unbridled. I'll give you a wink if you show some real potential in meeting my expectations. And then, maybe we'll talk about the ways we should let unbridled nature take its course. Till then, one piece of advice to all those guys out there: get to it, Jim.
This is Gay Dating 2013.
Hi,
What's up?
chillin'.
Pics?
You? Into?
Talk.
Verse.
Host?
Yep.
Now?
Yep.
Gay men's promiscuity does carry its risks, as we all know. HIV/AIDS and the stigma that surrounds it, particularly in the gay community, still endures. Reverend Fisher.
And so we believe, I'll just speak for myself here, that homosexual behavior should again be contrary to public policy. It ought to be against the law. So then the question becomes, what kind of sanctions are you prepared to propose?
It's a
lucky. I was kind of at a distance from a lot of it. You know, I had friends who died, and certainly now I'm intimately connected to it all. But in terms of the actual act up and the things that were going on, I was serving a church outside of Philadelphia as a lay professional in suburbia, and just hearing about this stuff going on. Scott had a much rougher time of it than I did. He joined the Navy at one point, but was honorably discharged because of mental illness. He was diagnosed HIV positive early in the epidemic, was active in GMHC, and was really at the heart of it, and yet all of his friends were dying. He survived.
This is true.
A lot of people said, not me. They're dead. Oh yeah. A lot of people said it's not going to happen to me because they were still having unsafe sex even though their friends were dying. They would say, oh, it's not going to happen to me, and I buried a lot of them. I must have buried thousands of friends, acquaintances, and customers over the years. The 25 years I was at Ninth Circle, I used to watch people come in and their skin turned from this color, their skin, because they didn't have drugs yet. And I knew. Their skin looked leatherish, and they got thinner, thinner, thinner. And then when I didn't see them anymore, I knew they were dead.
I overheard this from one of my roommate's friends recently.
You don't die from AIDS. You only die from AIDS if you're homeless and live on the street on West 4th Street and never go to hospital. You take drugs every day and you're fine. Do you know how many people have AIDS? Do you know how many guys go and fuck prostitutes and get AIDS and then go home and give it to their wives? The highest incidence of AIDS is in black women. Do you know how many people have AIDS? Moms, dads, grandmothers. People just don't talk about it.
According to the CDC, Center for Disease Control, this government interview, listing all the statistics for the HIV/AIDS epidemic since it began, and I think 60 to 61% of all the males who've ever been diagnosed with HIV/AIDS contracted it from having sex with other males. Now there's about another 22% who contracted it through intravenous drug abuse.
This is from a blog I found.
A recent survey showed that nearly half the users of the gay phone app Grindr engage in unprotected sex. I really wish that people would put down their smelling salts and try to understand the reasons why. Somehow we have come to the homophobic conclusion that when gay men engage in the romantic, emotional, spiritual act of intercourse without a barrier, we label it psychotic barebacking. But when straight people do it, we call it sex.
Very simple, very straightforward. That our sanctions for homosexual behavior, or for homosexual conduct, should be the same as they are for drug abuse. In other words, whatever we decide are appropriate public policies to deal with drug abuse, those are the same policies that we use in dealing with homosexuals. Because the risks are the same.
And now there are new strains of it, and I watch these kids having unsafe sex like crazy. Because they think because the new medication, they'll live longer. A lot of porn stars, and now they're all gone. And they're kids today. And there's movies out called Raw, where they're all having unsafe sex all over the world.
And finally, we can stop pretending that those who remain fixated on condom usage have the moral upper hand. The emperor has no clothes, and he isn't wearing a rubber either.
But despite all these issues, I feel like there's this sort of undercurrent of religious rhetoric that kind of gives people an excuse for this very closed-minded, homophobic attitude. This is Reverend Mark.
Because religion is at the heart of it, that's oftentimes what it becomes so important to people that this is it. This is where we draw the line, and this is what we will die over.
John Delwyn Jordan, East Memorial Baptist Church, Prattville, Alabama.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we ask for your help and forgiveness at this time. God, we've taken you out of our schools. We've taken you out of our prayers. We've murdered your children. We've said it's okay to have same-sex marriage. God, we have sinned. We ask once again to forgive us for our sins.
Scott Lively, Abiding Truth Ministries.
Homosexuality is not a sin just like any other sin, but rather a warning sign that our society is on the verge of collapse. They're dangerous predators, even killers, and they caught this gay disorder through an evil game of tag. Homosexuality is a social cancer. There is a war going on in the world. There is a war that is waging across the entire face of the globe. It's been waging in the United States for decades, and it's been waging in Europe for decades. It's a war between Christians and homosexuals.
For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men working that which is unseemly, and receiving in
Because I can
themselves
show you
in that
as much
recompense
proof as you
of their
have to show
error
me
which
that
was
God
met.
hates me. I have more to prove to show you that God loves me. For us as Christians, we're not law-based. We are grace-based. We are faith-based. And Jesus himself is breaking the very laws that some Christians are holding so dearly to. I don't mean breaking those laws, but I mean breaking laws from that tradition. And so this idea that we obey laws to make God happy is just not what I see Jesus teaching, you know? And he even addresses that in his teachings. And so I want to say to folks, you know, like the Westboro Baptist Church, how can somebody who purports to be a follower of Jesus then sit there and put the word hate and God in the same sentence? When Jesus talks about loving the other, when Jesus talks about reaching out and loving your enemy, Jesus never said that God hates anybody. So that's very confusing to me, because they don't really embrace the teachings of Jesus.
What really scares me most about this kind of religious rhetoric is the effect that it has on young people and children in particular. This is a blog I found online about a mother talking about her experience going to Walmart with her 2-year-old son.
This is Dexter. He is 2 years old, and he loves to be Batman and Superman and Spider-Man. He's a real boy's boy. He pretends he's fine, and he captures the baddies who threaten us. He's the sweetest little troublemaker you'll ever meet. His favorite color is pink, and he loves Dora the Explorer. He's been known to wear my skirt as a dress, and he delights in cuddling with his mama.
Ladies and gentlemen, we need to talk about children.
Last night, I took my 2 boys out to pick up a couple of things from Walmart. After struggling to get him dressed and get his shoes on, I had to pry an overlarge teddy bear out of Dexter's arms as he was set on taking him with us. This brought on tears and tantrums, which I somehow managed to calm very quickly. But when I attempted to remove my discarded lace flower headband from his head, which he'd been wearing all day, I saw him getting ready to fight. So I let him to it. Who was he hurting? He rocked that headband.
So your little son starts to act a little girlish when he's 4 years old. Instead of squashing that like a cockroach and saying, "Man up, son, get that dress off you and get outside and dig a ditch," because that is what boys do, you get out the camera and you start taking pictures of Johnny acting like a female, and then you upload it to YouTube, and everybody laughs about it, and the next thing you know, this kid is acting out childhood fantasies that should have been squashed.
So we're at Walmart, and a teenage girl starts to giggle.
Is that a boy or a girl?
He's a boy. She walks away, and then a man with a cut-off denim shirt comes up.
That's a boy.
Yep. The man steps forward, and he grabs the headband off of Dexter's head and throws it to the bottom of the shopping cart. He cuffs Dexter around the side of his head.
You'll thank me later, little man.
If you touch my son again, I will cut your damn hands off.
Your son's a fucking faggot. He'll get shot for it one day.
Dad, the second you see your son dropping the limp wrist, you walk over there and crack that wrist. Man up. Give him a good punch, okay? You are not going to act like that. You were made by God to be male, and you are going to be a male. And when your daughter starts acting too butch, you rein her in and you say, "Oh no, sweetheart. You can play sports. Play them to the glory of God. But sometimes you are going to act like a girl, and walk like a girl, and talk like a girl, and smell like a girl, and that means you are going to be beautiful. You are going to be attractive. You are going to dress up. And so we come to the last frontier, gender. The idea of being born with a gender that is different to your assigned sex is still incomprehensible to many people.
Transgender woman Diamond Woods was slain and dismembered by a man who picked her up earlier this month on a desolate stretch of Old York Road in Hunting Park, Philadelphia. She had spent 14 years on the streets battling drug addiction and making money the only way she believed she could as a transgender woman sidelined from mainstream society, by selling her body.
Well, when I came here 2 years ago, we started doing some pretty radical things. Yeah, and I keep thinking, oh my goodness, the old Germans who started this place must be, rolling around in their graves, because we started having what we call the gospel divas, and they're transgendered women who love performing and oftentimes lip syncing, wearing great costumes. And some will look and say it's a drag show, but I don't like to use the word drag because they're transgendered, Yeah, big difference. And that's been a huge learning curve for me, because I just haven't, before coming here, my experience with transgendered people had been so limited. But because of where we're at right now, and the gay and lesbian people feel pretty comfortable for the most part, and now the cutting edge belongs to the transgender people. They're the folks who need more support than anyone else. So we started doing this, and now we're doing it once a month. This Saturday, we'll be doing another one of these shows, and it's just it's so amazing to watch, because these women who, for the most part, are African American. For the most part, they grew up in the church, where this kind of music was very important to them, and yet, for the most part, again, not everybody, but for the most part, they were pushed out and told they were no longer welcome. And for them to be able to come back into a church and perform this kind of music in a style that they like to perform, and is part of our culture, is really great.
This is an artist living in New York. His name's Kay.
I think it took me a long time to realize I was trans. I didn't really think about my gender a lot as a kid, so there was a lot of space not to be very restricted in my gender growing up, which was great. So I tried to change my name when I was younger. I have this thing called synesthesia, which for a lot of people can be really interesting, where their senses are all mixed up. So they see music, like you hear something and you have visualization. For me, every letter and number has a color and a flavor. But my birth name was a lot of colors I could not stand. So I was always preoccupied with changing it because I did not like pastels at all. I wanted something a little more robust.
When I was in middle school, I wanted to be called a whole bunch of bad, really embarrassing names, like I wanted to be called Seven, and I would always change my name to a lot of gender-neutral names, but I didn't really know what that was about. And then I realized
now of transgender people suddenly has to be nuanced. And it's nuance that I don't understand, because it's not my experience. And I, in some way, at times, dealing with transgender people, sometimes will have a little bit more sensitivity to our straight friends who are, taking time to understand a gay and lesbian expression, because it's not theirs. So I think, and I think we as gay and lesbian people have gotten kind of relaxed. It's, oh great, our fight's over, yay. We can't, as long as there's no justice, no peace. If somebody isn't getting justice, then we all have to stand up and keep fighting for it.
So, here we are. Violence against LGBT community is ongoing around the world. I feel like I may have uncovered some of the reasons behind it, but more and more they just seem like excuses. And while I am filled with hope for the future, there is still a long way to go. This is true.
I've had the greatest life. I was on American Bandstand in 1958, 59. I came back, I hung out with a bunch of Jewish people, the first ones I ever met, in Brighton Beach, where I met Neil Sedaka, who lived right there. And I taught them the way they dance in the American Bandstand, Philadelphia style. I worked the first rock and roll show ever, 1954. There's a picture of me on my Facebook, on me and Buddy Holly, Frankie Avalon, Paul Anka, and they're all 14, 15, 16, 17, 19. I'm only 16. I had a good life. I used to review cabaret shows and theater for gay magazines and newspapers. So I had a good life. You know, I tell everybody next year is my going to be 75, and on the invitation it's going to say, if you don't come to my 75th, don't bother coming to my 100th.
I'm always challenging. The church likes to talk about it being, in the Lutheran church, we're pushing ourselves to be multicultural. We're pushing ourselves to reach out to Spanish-speaking people, to people of color, because we're a bunch of Northern Europeans and that's not always been our complexion. But I keep wanting to say, no, multicultural is more than just language and skin, you know? There is clearly another culture when we talk about LGBTQ, and boy, did I see it. We hosted, I mean, I didn't have responsibility for it except for space, but we had a funeral here recently for a very well-known drag performer, and the church was packed. And I mean, they did it up. It was open coffin. They had life-size cutouts of her in her costumes. They had shoes on display. I'm like, okay, I could never do this, but for these folks who were gathered for her fans, for her friends, for her family, you know, in quotes, this was authentic, and this was the way to celebrate her life.
I think it brings us together. I just don't want to lose our history here. This is where the gay movement began, and if we lose where it began, we lose our history. Because we wouldn't have Castro, and we wouldn't have California, or Boys Town, and all that without what happened here. We know we should respect where we came from and honor where we got our freedom.